in our settings today mean that I have to do it. So now we are recording. There we go. I'm going to start with some housekeeping things. The chat, you should have found it hopefully by now. If you wiggle your cursor around, you'll see a small speech bubble, and that clicking on that will open up the chat. We have heard that for some people the chat can be distracting. So if that is the case for you, just turn it off. We'll have people monitoring and speaking out any questions that appear there. But if it's a helpful way for you to engage, then feel free to use it, and we will be watching it. So we're recording this session and we'll be posting it onto our website later on. So if you prefer not to be recorded, please just turn off your camera, turn off your microphone, and then you'll be all set in that regard. If you're interested in captions, Teams does have the option for auto caption. You turn it on yourself by clicking on the 3 dots in the menu bar. They're not the greatest, but it's something. So if you like that feature, then you can turn it on for yourself. If you have any problems with Teams itself during the session, as often happens, the first step that's often been recommended to us is to quit it and start it again. But beyond that, unfortunately, we can do our best to do some live tech support. There's a few people in the background checking in with the chat if you want to do that. If you have any other accessibility concerns as appropriate to this webinar in particular, please let us know either in the chat, or if you need something after the fact, feel free to email any of the facilitators. The slides will be shared after the session. So if they're going too fast or you can't see them, fear not, you will get your very own personal copy that you can do with as you please after the session. And then one last thing, that we will be using Google Docs at one point during this session. So I think I still have, yes, I do, the links. I've just posted them again in the chat. If you're the kind of person who likes to open things up early and have them all ready, you're sorted yourselves out by name. So by the first letter of your first name, choose the right link, and that'll be where you go. I'll give you more instructions later on in the session. So lots of housekeeping. So I think in terms of next steps, so again, my name is Robin Attas, and I'm in the Center for Teaching and Learning, and I'm joined by 2 co-facilitators. So maybe Andrew, do you want to introduce yourself next?
Sorry, my microphone's being fun. Yeah, Andrew Ashby, and I'm the Accessibility Coordinator with Human Rights and Equity Office.
And Heidi?
Hi, everyone. I'm Heidi Penning, and I'm also from the Human Rights and Equity Office. Hi, Gail. I'm an equity advisor.
And then we've also invited Gail Eaton Smith to join us today. Gail, do you want to introduce yourself quickly?
Sorry, I had to unmute my mic. Hello, good morning. My name is Gail Eaton Smith. I am with Student Accessibility Services, part of Student Wellness, and I work with students who have in transition program and for learning strategies. So I am smack up close and personal with issues related to universal design.
Thanks so much, Gail, and thanks to Heidi and Andrew as well. So we're really pleased that we have such diverse representation of folks from different offices around campus. So even though you won't actually hear from every presenter, all of us are available for questions either during this session or later on, just so that you get those different perspectives from different spots around our virtual campus these days. So I'm going to start sharing my screen now. I do have some slides. And I will say my preferred mode of presentation within Teams is to actually leave the slides as if I was going to edit them. So I do recognize that they can be a bit small, but we'll just do our best. So I want to do a land acknowledgement. I always start events, classes with land acknowledgements, and it can be a bit awkward even face-to-face and challenging to make them be not tokenistic. And then now that we're virtual, it seems even more strange in some senses. But I think it's important to make a land acknowledgement because it helps me personally and my audience remind themselves and stay grounded in the fact of our history and our reality in terms of what peoples have been on and continue to be on this land. And also the land itself and the way that it can sustain us or the way that we engage and interact with the land. So I find it important to make those acknowledgements. And now that I'm not physically on campus, I make an acknowledgement for the place where I am. So I know that my home is still on the traditional territories of the Anishinaabeg and Haudenosaunee peoples, just as Queen's University is. But I also challenge folks now that we're in this remote context where we're not physically all in the same space and on the same land, to start to question, what does it mean? You know, what land are you on? Where are you? What's the history of that space? And who's been there before you? And who might be there in future? And how does your placement in that space change the ability of other peoples to occupy or to reclaim that space? So just a moment to think about that. In terms of our session overview, we've got about 10 minutes where I'll give you some introductions and guiding principles, and then we'll jump right into a scenario activity using universal design for learning. There were resources shared in advance of the session. We tried to use a bit of a flipped model or an asynchronous delivery model for this session, where we provided you with some resources in advance in the hopes that you'd have a chance to look at those, so that when we meet face-to-face, we're able to do some application activities and answer some more in-depth questions without having to repeat all of the initial information that's available elsewhere. So recognizing that some people have signed up to this quite late, I will take some time to go over the basics of what Universal Design for Learning is before we dive into the scenario, but not too much time. So just be aware that that's going to happen. Then I'll turn it over to Andrew Ashby to talk about accessibility tips and tricks from his perspective. And we'll hopefully have about 10 minutes left at the end for some concluding discussion, Q&As, and a webinar evaluation survey. So feel free, as I've said before, to use the chat to ask questions if that's helpful. And if not, feel free to hide it as well. Okay, so I decided to start with this slide around dirty laundry because, and I don't mean to kind of, I think I want to keep it light, but also be a bit real about this. So I think there's often the attitude with accessibility and accommodations concerns from people that this is, you know, maybe not my job, or I thought I was here to do such and such. And I want to just be clear, accessibility is everybody's job. That's what, you know, it's part of teaching. If learners need things, then it's on the job of instructors to figure out how to meet those needs. And it's this ongoing negotiation between the needs of the instructor and the needs of the learner. That's what teaching is. So it is everyone's job. At the same time, I do want to acknowledge that both accessibility and universal design can feel like one piece of information too many, especially in this sort of pandemic era where we're all shifting to remote teaching and being asked to take on and learn so much new information around modes of teaching, technology, that sort of thing. The idea of even adding one more piece to that ginormous pile feels like a lot. Also feels like a lot to manage accommodations and extenuating circumstances requests. I know, having heard from instructors over the years, that it's difficult, it's challenging, it's not easy. And as we shift to remote, there's quite good possibility that there's going to be an even greater number of requests than usual. So I think I want to acknowledge that these are all very real concerns that people have, and I don't want to pretend that folks are not thinking the things that are on this slide, because I think, for me anyways, I much prefer to talk about things openly and just say, you know, these are my biases, or this is the way I'm feeling. But that said, I think it's important to think positive about this. So accessible and inclusive teaching can benefit all learners is kind of the big selling point here, is that even though it's one more thing on the pile, that it's something that will benefit everyone if done well. So even though it feels like more than you can handle, it's still worth the effort. At the same time, I think for those who feel like, who kind of cringe at the idea of universal design, that how could we possibly come up with something that will work for everyone all the time? Well, we can't, it's impossible, but we can aspire to it and yet recognize its limitations. So I think that's kind of the framework I work from when I think about UDL, is not, yes, I've done it and it works for everyone all the time, but no, I'm trying, I'm aspiring, I'm getting there eventually, we're getting there most of the time. And I think for me, the third point, remote teaching as an opportunity as well as a challenge, kind of relates to the idea of having a positive attitude all the time. And it's something I personally work towards every day. But the notion of seeing this as an opportunity where all of a sudden we've all been pushed towards using the course website, towards using technology, towards doing things, having PowerPoint slides. And all of those things are often things that students with accessibility concerns or just generally universal design for learning principles recommend. Things like having your lecture notes in advance, preparing course content in multiple forms. Those things are things that are being pushed upon us now because of the shift to remote, but there also happen to be really great practices in terms of accessibility and universal design for learning. So as much as we might be feeling overwhelmed by everything with the shift to remote, there are a lot of silver linings within this. And one of them can be the way that we shift our teaching to become more accessible, more inclusive for all learners. So as I mentioned, there were a couple of resources provided in advance, directing you to different things around universal design for learning. To give you a really brief overview, it's basically what it is an approach to teaching and learning that uses cognitive science around how people learn to remove as many barriers to learning for as many people as possible. It's inspired by the theory of universal design generally. So one example I like to use when I think about design is a door. So if you think about a door that has a door handle, that's possible. Some people can open that door, no problem. Some people can't. So if you replace the door handle or the door knob with, say, a push bar, now more people can open that door. So if I had, for example, I have two useful able-bodied hands, but I might have stuff in my hands. With a push bar, I can jam my hip up against the door and still get through. But a push bar is maybe still not accessible to some. So you could add, say, an electric button that's at a lower height so that others can use that. So all of those are steps towards universal design in a physical way. Universal design for learning takes that same principle of how can we allow more people access, how can we remove more barriers to learning, but in a learning environment rather than the physical one of moving around. The slide you see on your screen is kind of a classic slide by an organization called CAST. And they're usually the go-to site for anyone talking about universal design for learning. So that's just cast.org. And I find it somewhat ironic that this slide itself is not accessible. So there you go. We're always aspiring, right? But I think what this slide is meant to show you is that the basic principle of universal design is that there's three things that you focus on. And that within each of those three things, you're always thinking about multiples. So you're providing multiple means of engagement for students. How can you make purposeful, motivated learners? You're providing multiple means of representation, again, for your learners. And you're providing multiple means of action and expression. So this chart here, it's also a lot of text, but at least it's what I've tried to do here is kind of raise questions rather than have bullet points that are maybe somewhat theoretical and hard to see what the practical application is. But I want to invite at this point if there are particular questions about UDL. So I'm really, and I will say I've blasted through this. I am assuming that you've looked at the resources. So for those who haven't, this may seem like a lot. But for those who have, I'm wondering if there are specific questions still coming through. This is the fun moment when radio silence is a good thing and I'm just letting you think and possibly type. But it's looking to me like there's not any questions coming through. Folks are fairly confident at this point. Thank you, Joanne, for telling me it was a good summary. All right. So I think then I want to just like dive right in, get our hands wet. It's hot out. We can jump right in the pool of UDL. And I want to try out this particular scenario activity. Oh, I do have a question. The expressing and communication, could you explain the two-stage exam? Maybe that's in the previous slide. Sorry, Maria, I see your question, but I'm not entirely sure what you're referring to. But what it sounds to me like is a two-stage exam might be an exam where you do one part and then do another part. And perhaps the way that exam is designed in terms of having the two parts allows learners to engage with that particular assessment in different ways. I know that's a bit of a vague answer, but if you want to give me some more to go on, I can elaborate a little bit. While Maria is working on that, if any, I'm going to set up the activity I want to do, because this is going to be the moment when we have controlled chaos for 5 or 10 minutes. So I've set up 3 Google Docs. And when you get into the Google Doc, you're going to choose which Google Doc you enter based on the first letter of your first name. And Carolyn's putting the 3 links into the chat right now. So you'll go into your Google Doc and there'll be a scenario there. So as an example, you'll see on your screen right now, I've got this scenario. Your course has a 1-page written assignment. It's week 4 of the course. Several students have missed all submissions. At least 2 or 3 students ask for extensions every week, citing extenuating circumstances that you find plausible. So that's an example of a scenario. And then there'll be 3 questions in a chart. How could you use UDL principles when planning your course in order to avoid or minimize the situation? What could you do in the moment to respond? And then how would specific teaching contexts impact the scenario? So this first column is really to do with how would you prevent this from happening based on the design of your course in advance. The second one is more like, oops, you did it. What do you do now? So because there may well be various strategies that you can use within that particular situation. And then this third column may or may not be useful. I wanted to give you an opportunity to think more deeply about your specific course context, because I know often with these webinars, the CTL folks, we have to speak at somewhat of a general level because we're trying to appeal to everyone. But if you want to talk specifically about in my lab, this is what I would do, or in my art studio, this is what I would do. So think through those specific contexts in this column. So I think we're getting the 3. I wonder if I can stick them in. So there I've got all 3 Google Docs in the chat. I'm going to switch over to look at, it looks like some folks are already in their Google Docs. So I'm going to give you about 5 minutes to kind of type your way through this. And just at the meta level, this is my replacement for breakout rooms. Since Teams is not very good with having breakout rooms, I decided to use breakout docs instead. So take a few moments, read through your scenario, come up with some strategies for responding. And I'm actually going to go back now to my slides so that you can at least see if you're able to have multiple screens open so that you can see my reference chart as you're working. And if anyone's totally confused, feel free to stick a question or concern in the chat. Okay, I'm going to switch over and see how you're doing with these Google Docs. Some folks are writing in the first one, some folks are writing in the second, some folks are writing in the third. So in the interest of time, for those who are still writing, finish up your thoughts. I really recognize that was not enough time for you to do a deep dive into this activity. With just an hour for a webinar, there's only so much we can do, but I'm going to leave these documents editable until tomorrow. So if you have other thoughts, you want to keep contributing, feel free to keep putting them in. And then after tomorrow, I'm going to close editing, but I'm going to leave them available. And when you get your package of resources after this webinar, probably sometime next week, you'll be able to have access to these and kind of see some of the ideas that emerged. So treat them as living documents for another 24 hours and anticipate that you can use them as resources in the future. So let's take a look at the first scenario. In this scenario, you're teaching a remote learning course. You check your students' login statistics and discussion board posting stats once a week. It's week 3 of the course, and you notice the majority of students don't check the discussion board to read other posts after they post their own responses, and several haven't even logged into the course at all. So this is really a question around students not engaging with your course, either in specific ways or in terms of the whole course as a unit. So lots of ideas around how to use UDL principles in terms of self-assessment, ways to encourage participation, things around student engagement. So really promoting students to take control of their own learning and to engage in the course because that's what's best for them. So giving them that motivation to do so. Some in the moment responses, reaching out to those who are not participating. You'll notice that in this scenario, I kind of built in the cue that maybe this is something you should be checking once a week on your own as part of kind of your processes of teaching. So, you know, just as face-to-face teaching, you might dedicate a certain amount of time every week to looking at emails from students from a particular course or meeting with your TAs in a remote environment. Having those checks every week to make sure that course engagement is still happening is really important. So a lot of explanations, using a class announcement, and then some specific teaching contexts, thinking about the difference between smaller classes and larger classes, and thinking about students' comfort in those different environments and whether perhaps some of the asks you have on students are maybe too much. One other thing to think about with this question, because so this scenario is so much about whether students are present in the course. One other thing to think about is how much you're present within the course, how much students see you participating, see you checking on the discussion board and replying to posts, see you posting short videos to talk about what's going on in each week. So it might also be a solution to think about how much you're present within the course and then to use that as a model for students in terms of how much they're there. Okay. So I know that there are lots of other great ideas. I'm going to move on just for the sake of time. The second one, here's a student contacting you by email explaining they're struggling to find things in your course website in OnCue. And then they go on to tell you about their learning from home situation, which is quite challenging. And so we can imagine the first part of the scenario about having difficulty navigating an OnCue site is absolutely common, regardless of face-to-face to online. But then the additional challenge of being in remote, that's really something that we're going to face a lot this fall. There's a question from Terrence about whether it's synchronous or asynchronous classrooms. If you want to think about one of those specifically, go for it. But I think these challenges could emerge no matter which strategy you choose for teaching. Certainly, we're recommending asynchronous wherever possible. But I think that there's challenges to even asynchronous teaching that a lot of these scenarios will address. I hope that answers your question. So looking at how to deal with this situation, course overviews at the start, giving students strategies for studying. Certainly Student Academic Success Services, or SAS, has piles of resources that you can direct students to. You don't have to create those things yourself. Organizing information into modules. And if you look in OnCue, you'll see that there are templates provided for you. We'd strongly encourage you use those just to help students who are taking multiple courses be able to see something similar from course to course. Providing central places to find things. In the moment to respond, giving some different options in terms of either meeting with the student in advance, thinking about whether all the class is facing that challenge or is it just one student, thinking about how your strategy might change depending on which of those situations is the case. And I think that there's also a layer in here. So we don't know what the student's scenario or situation is. We don't know if they might have other situations on top of the remote learning challenge that are compounding things. So for instance, maybe they also have a learning disability where they need a quiet space and they don't have a quiet space. And as instructors, it's not our right nor responsibility to ask that question of a student, but there's always the option to suggest, hey, I don't know if this is the case for you, but if going to QSAS or Queen's Student Accessibility Services would be helpful, here's the link. Or I don't know if this would be helpful to you, but I know that Student Academic Success Services has a lot of great resources on learning from home. Here's the link. So giving those referrals just as a matter of course can also be helpful. I'm recognizing I'm almost out of time, so I just want to say that with the third scenario, it was mostly to do with tests and timed exams, which we know are a challenge for students in face-to-face and online environments. I'm strongly, and I'm backed up by many educational support professionals around campus, discouraging timed anything. So I think that the biggest thing to take away out of the UDL principles is to avoid timed assessments, period. But I recognize that there are times when that's important and useful for instructors, particularly those teaching large classes. And then there are certain mitigating things that you can do there. Okay, so I thank you all for entertaining this somewhat haphazard and wild ride through various UDL scenarios. I know this was quick. If you have more questions, feel free to contact me, or we may have some time at the end. But I do want to turn it over now to Andrew Ashby to talk a little bit more about the tech side of things.
Thank you very much, Robin. I'm just going to get my slides up here. I'm going to leave my camera off because I have a cat on my lap right now who's desperately trying to get my attention. And you don't need to see that. Joys of working from home, am I right? Okay, so hopefully those slides are visible to everyone. So I'm just going to build a little bit on what Robin was talking about in terms of UDL and where accessibility fits in, how in where UDL. So UDL really extends the range of accessibility, and it does so by emphasizing the importance of considering it from the outset. And I always say when you increase accessibility, you decrease the need for accommodation, and you also increase usability for everyone. So if you think about that in terms of educators out there who are, struggling to manage all these accommodation requests, increase accessibility, decrease accommodation. Not that accommodation is a bad thing, but if you can decrease it, it's good to do so. So I'm gonna use PowerPoint presentations in this, it's showing you 4 tips. And I chose PowerPoint because if you understand how to do these things in PowerPoint, you're going to understand how to do them across the Microsoft Office suite. It's the same for Microsoft Word, Excel, Outlook, for your emails, and so on. So it's very important. Now, if you're saying to yourself, I want more than 4 quick tips. I want the whole kit and caboodle here. Give it to me. Give everything to me. If you go to the Accessibility Hub website, go to the How to Info section. There are full tutorials on how to make accessible Word docs, accessible PDFs, PowerPoints, on-cue emails, videos, social media, meetings and events. All of that is there. So it's a good one-stop shop if you want more information. So the first tip I want to talk about is a choice of fonts that you use in your PowerPoint presentations. So kind of the first point I want to make is keep your underlying text reserved for your links. We are certainly at that point where we see something underlined, we just assume it's a link and try to click on it or select it with our devices. Avoid using text shadow. People love text shadow. What it does is text shadow, you're actually given the word twice. So in the example of text shadow, you're added the word text shadow twice. It's just making it opaque and to an angle to give that effect. So certain technology, like a screen reader for someone who's blind or has a low level of vision, what's going to be read aloud to that user is avoid using text, shadow. So say those words twice. Not the end of the world, but it can be quite annoying and confusing for someone using that tag. Try to use fonts, the font size around at least 24 point size. It's not always possible, but it's good to at least have that. Then you know your slides can be read from the back of a room or much easier in this kind of scenario online. In terms of types of fonts, there's two big groups. There's serif fonts and sans serif fonts. Sans serif fonts are considered to be more accessible. If you look at those examples, sans serif fonts are pretty much universal in thickness, are easier to read, create less eye strain for everyone. Serif fonts have those little serifs, they get thin and thick in places, can be difficult to read, cause eye strain, cause headaches. Usually about this time I get asked about the Queen's font. Because they're being recorded, I'll be a little diplomatic here. The Queen's font is a serif font. It's based on Palatino, but the Queen's Visual Identity Guide as the first choice as a replacement is a font called Myriad Pro, which is a sans serif font. So I would say use that instead of the Queen's font. So if you use the Queen's templates for your PowerPoints, they always use the Palatino font. It's best to replace that font.
Andrew, there's a question from Gail Eaton Smith of whether the serif fonts are readable by screen readers.
Yes, they are. It's just more of a visual thing for anyone who can see them. They just tend to, as I said, create that eye strain if you read it for several hours of your students. It can create headaches. We are seeing, as you know, a lot of students with head injuries, concussions. So a sans serif font is easier for them to read. The second tip is describing non-text elements. So this is where if you add anything to your PowerPoints, to your documents, to your websites that isn't text, you need to include a text equivalent. So for things when you add a picture, a logo, chart, graph, anything like that, you need to have a text equivalent. And the best text equivalent or example one is what they call alternative text or alt text for short. You see it called alt text quite frequently. So when you add an image or chart or graph to your PowerPoint, and I'm using an example Office 365. Office 2016 is a little bit different. Office 2019 is almost identical to Office 365. But all you have to do when you add a picture to your PowerPoints, you just do a right click on that photograph. On that image, you get a shortcut menu. There's an edit alt text a selection there. This brings up a little sidebar on the right hand side. You just type a sentence or two describing that image in that description box. What the alt text does, you and I wouldn't see it, but technology does. So for example, a student using a screen reader, it will notify them image and it'll read the alt text, just so that somebody who can't see it knows the purpose or what is contained in that image. Another way to do it is you can just do one left click on that image, select a format, and there's an alt text button that will appear. Click on that, do the same thing. So alt text, most people know about it, but still tends to be the #1 accessibility error or issue around documents or web pages. So people know about it but don't include it quite often. So it's a very simple thing that you can do that really helps bump up your accessibility of that document. The third one is a big one, captioning audio or video. As you can read on the slide, it's sort of essential for anyone with a hearing loss or in the deaf community. It's also really good for students who have auditory processing issues. There's quite a number of students with learning disabilities that have this issue as well.
Andrew, before you get too into this question, there's one more question that's popped up about screen readers and alt text, and it's whether screen readers can manage tables or smart graphics.
Smart graphics, yes, you can add alt text to that. It's no problem depending on the complexity of it. You might want to add maybe a paragraph about that graphic, that smart graphic, or a graph or a chart. It's good to UDL just to include kind of that separate text, paragraph on another slide. It just kind of helps clarify that, because quite often alt text, you might be limited to a sentence or two, but it might not convey all the information that you want conveyed about what you're presenting. Sorry, what was the first part of that question, Robin?
Whether screen readers could read tables and smart graphics.
Yeah, if tables are done properly, PowerPoint and Microsoft Word have a insert table function. If you use that, it will be defined properly. So screen reader reads how many columns and rows are in that table, and it starts on column 1, row 1, column 2, row 1, and reads right to left that way, and announces to the user right the way through where they are, so they can understand what is there through the voice of the screen reader. So I hope that helps. Yeah, back to captioning. There is also on the Accessibility Hub a tutorial around captioning and transcription as well. I am doing some work on the hub because, as you can well guess, this area is changing very rapidly. It's almost day to day how quickly it's changing. So I'm trying to keep up with it best I can and relay that information through the hub. So a few of those tutorials are going to be changing over the next few weeks. But when it comes to captioning and PowerPoint, hot off the presses as of May, PowerPoint actually has its own real-time automatic captioning available. And again, I'm showing screenshots on the slides from PowerPoint 365, the web version that you see if you log into Office 365 with your net ID. That version of PowerPoint tends to be kind of stripped down more. So it's good for presentations because it uses less of your computer resources, and it tends to run faster than the desktop version. So if you do log into there, what you'll see is either a simplified ribbon or a classic ribbon. I believe the default is a simplified ribbon. There's a little toggle switch right at the top that tells you if you're simplified or classic. And what you can do to set up this automatic captioning is just click on the Always Use Subtitles button, which is already there. You can select your spoken language, your subtitle language, and where you want the captions to appear on the screen. It's usually best to always select below slide because people using captions tend to look for that. That's where traditionally they always are. So it's good to do that. That's really all you have to do is set it up. And then we get presenting your PowerPoint, and you're in the presenter mode. Next to the arrows where you can switch slides back and forth, there's an actual Use Subtitles button. You just hit that, and the automatic captions will appear. So it's important to know, as Robin said, automatic captioning is not 100% accurate. They seem to be pushing about 80% accuracy. It really helps when you are presenting, if you are, to use a headset microphone. You can just use the earbuds that come with your cell phone, but anything that helps amplify your speech a little more, it helps that audio quality be a little better, really helps with the accuracy. Where accuracy usually gets things wrong is around names of people, acronyms. So be aware of that. I know at Queen's we're sometimes a lot like the military in terms of how many acronyms we have. So just be aware of that and try not to speak so many acronyms, speak the full thing, full name and term, so that they have a better chance of appearing that way as well. And that's really all you have to do for the automatic captioning through PowerPoint. So it's really helpful for the synchronous environments. If you're doing asynchronous, or you have something recorded already, PowerPoint does have the web interface in the newer desktop version have a send to Microsoft Stream, which we also have access to as part of our Microsoft Office 365 when we log in. If you send it Stream, it has an automatic captioning button as well. You just click on that, wait a few minutes, and then they appear. You can download the video with the captions and embed that into your learning management system or onto whatever you happen to use. You also get a text transcript of that captioning file that you can download as well, or copy and paste it into a Word doc and put that into your learning management system or your course, whatever it happens to be.
Andrew, there's a couple of questions about captions. One is coming from Sean Watt, specifically about PowerPoint. He asks, if we turn on closed captioning in PowerPoint, does it record the captions for the viewer to turn on and off, or do we need to make sure it gets captured in our recording and then all viewers will see them?
I believe there's a toggle that the user can turn it on or off, just like any video. So it should be an issue. Anybody wants it can see it. Anybody doesn't have to go through that. So it's up to the user. Hopefully that answered.
Awesome. And then the second question is from Dan Vina asking, do we know if Zoom or Camtasia generate closed captions when we record lectures or screen share?
Zoom does not right now. I say right now, apparently it is coming. Caption in Zoom right now is you have to outsource it. Invite the outsourced company to the meeting, do the captioning live. Now, if you do record through Zoom, you can again upload that recording to a service like Stream, like Camtasia, like Ensemble. Ensemble is another one that we have access to that can generate the automatic captioning as well. And Camtasia does allow you to edit the captions as well. Ensemble has that ability as well. Stream does not. You're kind of stuck with the automatic captioning, but Ensemble and Camtasia, you can edit the captions. So you can spend a few minutes and clean up any errors that you see popping up, spelling, etc.
There's one more question about captioning. Given, right, there we go. So icons have blurred the question for a second. So given the caption is not 100% accurate with PowerPoint and video, would it be okay to reach out to students who might need extra support at the beginning of a course? Andrew, do you want to take that one? I've got some thoughts too.
I'll give you a few thoughts. Gail, if you have anything too, feel free to jump in. I would say it's always a good idea to ask for it. Probably students who need the captioning are going to go through QSAS and get that accommodation informal with a letter of accommodation. If that happens, there is a process being developed as we speak for the university that courses that students who need captioning as an accommodation that will be outsourced to a company, and the university will provide the funding for that. Again, it's kind of early days. That process is being worked out right now as we speak, but hopefully that should be what's happening. So it's good that it would be one less thing for faculty to worry about if it's being outsourced. But Gail, I don't know if you have anything you want to jump in there.
Well, not really. The students that I work with, those who, as you've said, Andrew, those who need captioning, typically they go through the QSAS advisors and they will have sorted out their accommodation plan, which might involve technology, which might involve reaching out to the instructor, or even a dialogue between the instructor and the advisor to sort through that. So it's never a bad thing to reach out to students at the beginning. But the students with whom I work, typically the access to closed captioning is not as much of an issue for them.
Gail and Andrew, I think I would just add that it's always helpful to check in with all students at the start of a course about what their accessibility or accommodations needs might be. Recognizing that as instructors, we're human and we're doing our best to accommodate everyone while also managing our own time. And I think, having something like an opening survey as an introduction to the course, just to reach out to everyone. And then also, if a student presents you with an accommodations letter, treating that as an opportunity for a conversation. And not every student is going to take you up on that conversation necessarily for various reasons, but there's no harm in saying, oh, great, thanks for the letter. Would you like to meet to discuss this? And having that be part of it too. Andrew, I'll turn it back to you, although we are getting short on time now. So this is unfortunately we're not number 4.
Last slide. So if you really want help with this accessibility and knowing whether your PowerPoints are accessible, Microsoft Office actually has a built-in accessibility checker. So when you have PowerPoint or Word or your email open, if you click on File, go to Info, click on the Check for Issues button. There's a Check Accessibility selection there. Choose that, and it'll show you what's wrong, if anything, and how to correct that mistake. There's also a link there to check color contrast, which is another really good important thing. And if you really want to get your geek on and you really want to experience what it's like to use a screen reader, if you have a Mac, there's one called VoiceOver, which is already built into your Mac operating system. If you use Windows, there's NVDA you can download and install. It's really helpful to experience what technology is doing, some of the technology that your students are using, and you can get a really good feel about not only accessibility but usability of your presentation or documents or your web pages as well. Okay, so that is all I had on that. So I don't know if there's any other questions.
And I think at this point we can open it up too for any questions at all. The intent with this session was really to give you a bit of a glimpse into the kind of the theory of what universal design is and what that, striving towards something that's accessibility for all and universal in terms of the barrier-free access to learning, but then also to get into some of the nitty-gritty of some of the tech and how to use various technologies to help enhance that aspect of what you're doing. So recognizing that we didn't do a deep dive into either of those topics, but giving you a bit of a flavor for both. Are there further questions that are emerging at this point for you now? And while you're thinking, I'll go back to sharing my screen. We've got a resources slide that you can take a peek at. So in terms of resources, of course, the Accessibility Hub, Center for Teaching and Learning, and then the CAST website that I mentioned earlier, and a Universal Design for Learning module. So those last two are the resources that were sent in advance. So Dan has a question, and this is maybe more for Andrew. Is there a helpful combo of colors that we should use on slides that I can bring back to my department?
Best combo on slides, keep your slide color white and use a dark text color, be it black, be it dark gray, dark blue, something like that, or keeping your slide, black with a light color text. but generally the white color text tends to be the winner. But some students, like I said, we're seeing certainly an uptick, as I said, with head injury, concussion. So sometimes just being able to switch to like a dark background and light text makes it easier for those students. But either one of those is a good way to go.
Gail's adding to the chat now that in her experience, most students struggle with the structure of the course, the number and kinds of assignments, high percentage exams. So, I mean, that's a place where universal design and really thinking intentionally about the planning of your course and what's going to work in terms of students across the board in terms of, you know, giving them access to learning is really important. Thanks, Gail. So feel free to keep asking questions. We have a few more minutes, but you'll also see that Caitlin's posted in the chat the evaluation survey link. So if you're kind of done and ready to move on or get a stretch break in your day, feel free to click on that, continue on with other things. But we do have a few more minutes if there are more questions. Kathleen wants to know about my pictures. I get them from Pixabay. Which is a free picture website, and some of them actually were my own. One right at the beginning that was my own, but mostly they're from Pixabay. Heidi, do you have anything that you want to add?
Not really. I added a couple of comments in the text, so great job, everyone, and great questions too from the participants.
Yeah, I mean, this webinar in particular has been such a team effort, so I'm really grateful to Andrew and to Heidi from the Human Rights and Equity Office and to Gail from QSAS. I've also benefited from a lot of learning from the people at Student Academic Success Services around kind of getting the student perspective on a lot of these things. So I think it's encouraging to know that there's a real campus effort going on to make sure that the fall and the winter possibly are accessible to all learners, regardless of whether they're sitting in a dorm room or in a space off campus or in their parents' living room, and making that the best experience that we can hope for everyone under the circumstances. So thanks, everyone. And Andrew, there's a request to see your cat.